I used to believe that some absences were just mistakes, missed messages, wrong times, forgotten CCs. I kept believing it long after I stopped getting included. Caleb's message came through on a Thursday. "You're probably busy. Family weekend at Lake Tahoe. Grant said not to bother you." There was nothing after that. No smiley face, no follow-up, no wish you were here. I opened the Rhodes family group chat, just to see if I'd missed something. The banner was still that photo from last Christmas, the one where I stood slightly off to the left, wearing a grey sweater, while everyone else wore coordinated red. I remembered thinking I should try harder next year. That was the last time I told myself that. Later, I opened the Monterey County Property Records site. The cabin was supposed to be mine. Dad made that clear. He told me directly, and the will confirmed it. I used to check sometimes as a form of reassurance. This time, it didn't say my name. Owner Grant Rhodes, transferred by power of attorney, executed January 12th. I was in Kabul on January 12th. I clicked around, double-checked the document history, the filing date. It was all there neatly filed with my name signed in a font that mimicked my slant, but didn't quite get the loop in the Y right. I called Dorothy Slater's old number, Dad's estate attorney. A different voice answered the voicemail. Younger, brighter, no mention of her name. No forwarding information. Then the doorbell rang. The delivery man handed me a thick envelope from Decker and Hale, LLP. I didn't ask questions, just took it, closed the door, and opened it with the butter knife from the drawer. The letter inside read, "Request for voluntary transfer of assets pertaining to Rhodes Holdings and its real property. Should this matter not resolve promptly, documentation regarding disputed military service records will be submitted to relevant authorities. You have 15 days to respond." There was no greeting, just threat wrapped in formal language. I placed the envelope beside the chipped mug on the table. It was pale blue, with my name printed in block letters. Cassidy. A gag gift from my first deployment. The glaze had cracked years ago. I never replaced it. I reached for the drawer where Dad used to keep old warranties, folded flags, and fishing licenses. I found one of his notes in the back. The handwriting was scratchy, trembling. "Cabin belongs to Cassidy. Let them try. Let them try." The laptop took a while to boot. I opened my estate folder and scrolled through the scanned PDFs. There it was, his last amendment. Dated, signed, notarized. His signature leaned left at the end. I remembered watching him write it from the foot of his hospital bed. He didn't speak much that day, but I remember the pause before he handed the pen back. My inbox pinged. "Grant. Subject, efficiency. You were unavailable and overseas." Caleb and I made some decisions to keep things moving. Hope you understand. I clicked the attachment. A scanned power of attorney. My name in cursive. A ghost signature. No witness, no notary, no date stamp, but filed. Accepted. That was all it took. I reached for the mug, turned it slowly so the chip faced away from me. I didn't drink, just held it. It felt lighter than I remembered. I walked to the bookshelf, pulled out the old Navy manual Dad left behind. He'd marked it up with red pen. One line stood out. "Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is clarity." At the funeral, no one had asked me to speak. I stood in uniform. No one acknowledged it. Not even Caleb, who used to polish my pins and beg for MREs. Mom had glanced once, handed me a napkin and said, "You look tired. That uniform doesn't flatter you anymore." I'd smiled, not because it was funny, just because I didn't want her to see anything else. After the service, I'd offered to help sort the estate paperwork. Grant waved it off. It's already handled. You just got back. Take a breath. They always made sure I was just arriving or just leaving. Now the envelope on the table felt heavier than it should. The font was sharp, clinical. Even the signature line looked smug. I unfolded it again. Read the last paragraph slowly. The part that mentioned false records. I had earned every stripe, every citation. I had the scars and the discharge papers to prove it. But none of that mattered not here. I placed the letter back in the envelope, folded it once, not to return, just to contain it. There was no noise in the room, no wind, no music, just the hum of the fridge and the sound of my fingers pressing into the table's wood grain. I didn't text Caleb back. I didn't forward the email. I didn't look at the photo again. Some families don't slam doors. They just quietly change the locks and expect you to take the hint. And I had. I believed that if I softened the edges, they might let me stay. I chose the tea carefully, Darjeeling not too floral, the kind my mother used to steep only on Sundays. I wrapped it in cream paper, tied it with navy twine, wrote her name in my neatest print. I never saw it in her kitchen. When I called later that week, Caleb's voice had filled the space between rings. She probably got it. She's been busy with church stuff. Don't worry about it. I didn't ask again. When Grant got the promotion at Rhodes Holdings, I sent him Dad's old business book, the one with the margin notes and red ink underlines. I thought it might feel like something passed down, a gesture that said, I still remember who we were. He texted back a week later. Nice. Appreciate it. That was all. No picture. No thank you card. No mention at dinner, when we sat across from each other, elbows almost touching, plates arranged with formality and effort. I brought up the cabin once. Just once. Caleb and I were sorting the boxes Dad left behind, fishing reels, tools, stained flannels that still smelled like sawdust. I picked up a photo of us with frozen noses and clumsy smiles, kneeling beside a pile of firewood. My fingers brushed the corner. Maybe we could fix it up. The roof's probably going. We could make it somewhere to meet again. Caleb didn't look up. I'll run it by Grant. He never did. When the board appointments were announced for the new foundation, my name wasn't listed. I'd submitted my interest months before, sent the email twice, actually. I told myself it was an oversight. People miss things. At the quarterly meeting, Grant stood in front of a poster board with pie charts and plans. I clapped when everyone else did. Later, he walked past my chair, one hand brushing his suit jacket back into place. You've been gone a while. This stuff's more about presence. I nodded, not because he was right, but because I'd stopped wanting to argue. My presence apparently was always a little too late or a little too much. When they rescheduled Dad's memorial, no one told me. I only found out when Aunt Maureen posted a photo, everyone around the lake candles flickering, Grant holding Mom's hand. I'd just finished folding a flag into a triangle, alone, somewhere else. Still, I wrote the thank you cards, addressed each one by hand. Thank you for honoring him. He would have appreciated your presence. I signed every card the same Cassidy. No title, no rank. At Thanksgiving, Mom passed me the rolls and looked at my shirt sleeve. That's a lot of starch. Military does that to people. Hard to relax after so many rules. I dipped my head, tore the roll apart slowly. The butter never melted. I offered to bring dessert for Christmas. She said it was handled. I brought it anyway. No one touched it. Caleb pulled me aside after dinner. You don't need to try so hard. Just showing up is enough. But it wasn't. They'd built a rhythm without me. Smooth, effortless. I used to think I was a missing beat. Now I realized I was just static tolerated in small doses, as long as I didn't make too much noise. The mug in the cabinet, the one I made at age 9 with my name etched, crooked, had been pushed to the back. I pulled it out once. Set it near the sink. The next day it was gone. Probably tossed. Probably not. I never asked. At one point, I emailed Grant about Dad's last journal. He used to write in the mornings before the house woke up. There were pages where he mentioned each of us. I remembered reading one where he wrote, "Cass always circles back. She doesn't need approval to stay loyal." I never heard back. A month later, a box arrived at my door. No note. Just loose pages and a photo of the journal torn from its binding. I stopped trying after that. Not in protest. Not in spite. Just a kind of quiet choice. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't call meetings, I didn't demand to know why I was never really invited, only notified. Sometimes I watched them across the table, laughing at jokes that came from shared rooms I had never entered. I poured the wine, smiled at the timing, held back the stories I knew would land too heavy. They liked lightness. I tried to give them that, but lightness isn't always welcome when it comes from someone who resigns you of weight. Once in the car, Mom reached over and turned the radio down as I laughed at something Caleb said. "You don't have to speak over everything. Silence isn't hostile." I looked out the window, counted mailboxes, let the hum of the road settle where her voice had been. For a long time, I thought if I folded myself smaller, I might fit. If I wore the right colors, left out the stories with acronyms, brought things instead of saying things, they might place me back into the frame. They didn't. And I stopped standing on tiptoe to be seen. I used to believe that timing was the only thing I needed to fix. The envelope was still sealed when I walked into the living room. 17 in the sweater, Mom knit the winter, before holding the letter from the academy like it might burn through my hand if I waited any longer. Caleb was on the couch holding the remote. Grant stood near the fireplace, laughing. Someone had just finished a toast. My mother turned toward me, raised her glass. "Cass, not right now. We're in the middle of something good." Her smile didn't falter. Neither did mine. I slid the letter into my coat pocket. No one asked what I was holding. I left it unopened until the next morning. I sat on the porch, read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope and pressed it between the pages of an old cookbook, the kind with the measurements in ounces, not cups. No one ever found it there. At Dad's memorial, the photo they chose was from that 4th of July, when everyone wore navy and khaki and tried to look candid. I wasn't there. I was in Germany then, trying to sleep through the weight of a shoulder that no longer worked right. I stared at that photo during the service, waiting to feel like I belonged to the people in it. No one noticed the absence. That told me enough. The program listed family roles. Grant was co-founder and legacy partner. Caleb was creative lead, and I was not mentioned. Mom read from a note card, voice steady, and said something about Dad's pride in the boys. Aunt June touched my elbow in the hallway afterward. "You always did your own thing. That's special too. Not quite pride. Not quite belonging." The wedding invitation from Caleb came addressed to my siblings. The handwriting was his careful and slanted, as if trying to look grown. I read the line 3 times, then set it on the counter beside the kettle. The RSVP card was printed with checkboxes, but no place to write in names. I checked will attend. I wore navy. I sat near the back. At the reception, Mom's hand brushed my shoulder as she passed. "Don't linger near the head table. You know how Grant likes symmetry." I stood beside the cake for a while, pretending to admire the design. I left before the dancing started. Sometimes I wondered if it was the uniform, or the way I'd started calling Dad Sir by habit, even when we were just fishing. Once over, coffee, Grant glanced at my sleeve. You don't have to dress like you're on duty all the time. We're just family. I looked at my cuff, the crease still sharp from the iron, the thread coming loose near the button. I didn't reply. There was a birthday lunch one year. Mom handed out cards, all handwritten. Mine had a printed message. No note, just her name. Caleb noticed, or maybe he didn't. He raised his glass and said, "To the most dependable person I know. Grant." The table laughed. I nodded. I used to keep a box of those things. Cards, clippings, the photo from my first deployment when I stood in front of the flag, with boots too big for my ankles. There was a ribbon in the box, deep blue, and barely wrinkled. One day I threw it out. Not in anger. Just because I no longer believed in waiting for someone to ask to see it. The things I remembered weren't loud. They were quiet absences. The way no one saved me a seat at the summer reunion. The group photos where I stood just outside the frame. The way my name was left off the slideshow at Dad's retirement dinner. Not out of spite, just left off. Grant once told me over a plate of grilled fish, "You're too competent, Cass. People assume you're fine without being seen." I smiled and squeezed lemon over the food. It stung the cuts on my thumb. When the Foundation newsletter came out, they listed family contributors. Grant, Caleb, even Mom under spiritual support. There was a footnote thanking those who served behind the scenes. No names, no initials. I clipped it out and folded it into quarters, slipped it into the back of my wallet, behind an expired ID. It stayed there for months, until I forgot why I'd kept it. I learned not to ask, not because I didn't want to know, but because I'd started to understand what silence buys. It buys a seat at the edge of the room where no one has to make room for you. It buys peace, but only for others. They called me private, detached. Cass has her own path. That was the language they used when they couldn't explain why I wasn't included. The truth was simpler. I stopped insisting I belonged. And once I did, so did they. No one has to erase what was never really written in. The chair was lower than I expected, and the back creaked when I sat. Someone had folded the corner of the docket sheet in front of me. Just once. A small triangle turned inward, as if someone had tried to hide a flaw and then left it there. I didn't wear the uniform. I didn't bring the medal case. I wore a grey blazer with a thread loose near the inner pocket, the one I kept my father's fountain pen in. It had run out of ink years ago. Across the aisle, Grant leaned toward his attorney and whispered something I couldn't hear. His tie was perfectly centered, the knot tight and dry. I recognized the watch on his wrist. It had been Dad's, though the band had been replaced. New leather, lighter shade. "Your Honor," the man beside him began. "We believe there is credible cause to question the authenticity of the documents submitted by Ms. Rhodes regarding her military service. Not a question." A sentence delivered without tremor. There are inconsistencies in deployment records in her injury reports and in her connection to the estate in question. I looked at the copies they passed forward. Blurred text, faded printouts, annotations circled in red. Someone had underlined a date with such pressure it bled through the page. None of them matched my files, but no one asked to see mine. Grant didn't look at me until he spoke. She was never actually deployed overseas. The files she provided were reconstructed, not original. There's no evidence of active duty, and as for the injury, she claims there's no supporting documentation. He didn't stutter. He didn't glance at the judge for approval. His voice had the rhythm of someone who'd practiced. I touched the edge of the envelope in my lap. It held a single sheet, a form from Walter Reed, notarized and complete. But I didn't reach for it. From behind him, Mom sat with her hands folded in her lap. Her scarf was navy, the same one she wore to church on cold Sundays. She didn't blink when he said my name. When the word fraudulent landed on the table, she didn't flinch when Grant turned to the court and stated, "She misled us, all of us. This isn't just about the property, it's about trust." Martin Decker, the lawyer, added, "We have reason to believe she used these forged documents to manipulate the last changes to Mr. Rhodes's will. Our request is simple, a full retraction of the estate transfer and the return of all holdings related to Whitmore Holdings. I remembered once years ago Grant had broken his arm falling off a treehouse Dad warned him not to climb. He cried, clutching his elbow dirt across his face. I'd carried him halfway back to the house. My knee was scraped from the fall, too, but I didn't tell anyone. He never thanked me. This isn't personal, Martin. Decker continued without irony. It's procedural. The judge didn't speak. A clerk typed. The sound of the keys felt louder than it should have. When the exhibits were handed across the bench, one of the pages fluttered to the ground. No one picked it up. She never fit in, Grant added, as if that were relevant. Not really. Not in the way the rest of us understand family. The sentence didn't echo. It landed without weight. Final. Practiced. Clean. My fingers curled slightly under the edge of the bench. There was a nick in the wood, the kind that happens when something is dropped hard and fast. I traced it once with my thumb. My name was listed in the revised asset claim as disputed party. No one objected. No one leaned forward to question the evidence, the motivation, the timing. No one asked why these accusations came only after I filed to maintain the deed transfer Dad had made months before he passed. No one asked where I was on January 12th, the day they said I forged a signature. I could have said Kabul, but it would have sounded defensive, and I wasn't there to defend. My mother finally shifted. Her voice was soft. We just want to make this right. For the family. I stared at the way she gripped her handbag. Tight. Tighter than needed. She wore her wedding band on the wrong hand now. Said it helped balance her fingers. No one looked me in the eye. I didn't raise mine either. I thought about the cabin, the rust on the hinges, the dent in the stovepipe I never fixed, the way the light hit the sea at 7 a.m. and turned everything silver. I thought about Dad's old tackle box, the one with the missing clasp and the hand-carved initials. It had sat in my closet for months unopened. When I finally lifted the lid, I found only 2 things: a broken lure and a note. No greeting. Just 2 words. Yours, always. The court moved forward without me. Dates, deadlines, recommendations. None of them addressed to me directly. When it ended, I stood. My legs didn't shake. The chair didn't creak this time. I walked out without touching the envelope in my lap. The cup I packed last was chipped at the rim, faintly so. A reminder of a morning when the dish rack gave in to its weight. I never replaced it. That small imperfection made it mine. I folded each shirt with deliberate slowness, not for neatness, for clarity. One drawer, then the next. Nothing I owned carried their names anymore. No initials etched into tags, no monograms gifted during birthdays. Only the jacket with a lining I stitched myself uneven but whole. My phone lit up once before I unplugged it from the wall, a number with no contact name. I didn't answer. The keys fit into the envelope tightly. I sealed it with my thumb and left it on the counter near the small note that read, "Deposit, returned in full." The handwriting belonged to the landlord, a quiet woman who never asked what I did for work, only if the hallway light bothered my sleep. I didn't write a letter. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. At the post office, I waited in line behind a woman with a baby strapped to her chest. The infant stared upward, not at anyone, just the fluorescent lights. When it was my turn, I handed over a document in a brown folder. The clerk asked if I wanted a return receipt. No. The reply surprised her, but she didn't press. Inside that folder, a scanned copy of the notarized military orders, a dated map with deployment codes, a logbook page in my handwriting, with the time I'd been airlifted, each line marked with the kind of ink that bleeds into the page fibers. I didn't attach a letter of complaint. Just a signed declaration. Just the facts. The same afternoon, I walked into a small bank in Pacific Grove. The air smelled faintly of citrus and cleaning solution. I handed over my identification and chose the form that let me open an account under one name only. No hyphen, no addition. Rhodes. The teller typed quietly, then paused. "Do you want a joint account?" A beneficiary added no. The signature I left behind looked steadier than I remembered. Familiar, though my hand trembled faintly on the downstroke. I didn't take the promotional tote bag they offered. The apartment Grant helped me secure had always been temporary. The lease was in his name. So was the water bill. I left both keys on the kitchen counter next to the spoon, with the worn handle I never bothered to replace. The account I closed took 5 minutes. The teller hesitated when confirming the closure. "You've had this for a long time." "Too long." They didn't ask why. On the sidewalk, the wind pulled at the hem of my sleeve. I adjusted it without thinking. The seam inside had been re-sewn twice. Once during a long layover in Frankfurt. Once during a restless night in Oregon. I emailed Julianne Porter before sunset. Short subject line. Shorter body. Protect the name. No press. Just truth. She replied with a single sentence. Understood. Elaine called the next morning. Her voice arrived without rhythm. "Your brother is trying to protect what's left of your father's name. No mention of mine. You've always been so reactive. This isn't helping anyone." I listened. She went on. "If you'd just talk to Grant, explain yourself, it might not be too late to undo the damage. Undo, not clarify, not mend. Undo." I didn't reply. The silence stretched until the call ended itself. I didn't redial. There was a box in the back of my closet. Inside it, a scarf Dad gave me before my first tour, a dog tag with the lettering faded, and a sealed envelope addressed in his hand, never opened. I didn't open it now either. Some things remain more whole, unopened. I looked at the calendar taped to the fridge door. A small red mark circled a date that had passed. Cabin maintenance, it read. Not in my handwriting. I threw the calendar out. "My attorney messaged they'll need to respond formally now. The court has your documents on record." I didn't check the filing myself. I knew what I sent. My mother's voice still lingered in the hallway of my memory. That tone that asked nothing but implied everything. You always make things harder than they need to be. Once, when I was 12, I dropped a casserole dish trying to help her carry groceries. She stepped over the broken glass and told me to go upstairs before you embarrass yourself further. I hadn't remembered that in years, but that morning it returned uninvited. I had nothing more to return. No protest, no closure letter, no voicemail left undone. Only the cup with the chipped rim, the scarf folded in thirds, and the name I chose to keep. No hyphen, no witness, no apology required. I hadn't heard my own footsteps in years. Not like this, not without boots, not without orders, not without someone waiting on the other end of the radio. The floors creaked where they always had, near the entryway just past the second nail from the right. I didn't fix it. I stepped over it at first, then stopped avoiding it. Let it speak. The teapot whistled faintly, the sound uneven. Even. I poured the water into a dented tin cup I'd found at the back of the cabinet, the one with a faint imprint of a bird on the side worn away from use, but still visible if turned to the light just right. There was no sugar in the house, no honey. I didn't make a list. A scarf hung behind the front door. Not mine. Worn wool frayed at both ends. My father's, maybe. Or maybe it had just always been there. I touched it once, but didn't move it. Some things hold their place, even after everyone else has left. The windows caught the salt wind in the afternoon. I wedged a chair leg under one that wouldn't close fully. It made a hollow sound when pressed like breathing through cloth. I didn't turn on the television. There wasn't one. I didn't bring a radio. The silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't anything. I swept the porch every evening, even when there was nothing to sweep. Leaves, sand, splinters of pine bark. The broom bristles had thinned unevenly, so the edge dragged slightly. It made a soft scraping rhythm. 3 passes left 1 right. The first week I opened an old notebook and started writing. Not sentences, not a journal, just names. Benson, Ives, Moreno, Taylor. The ones who never made it past rotation. I wrote them slowly, 1 per page. No ranks, no stories, just names. Then I folded the pages and placed them under a flat stone by the base of the front steps. I didn't cry. I didn't speak them aloud. That wasn't the point. A letter arrived on the 4th day. The envelope was thick, legal weight. No return address. The stamp was standard federal issue. I opened it with a knife, not curiosity. Inside, copies of court motions, scanned deeds, something notarized. A note clipped to the top read, "We assume you've retained counsel. Direct all further communication to Decker and Hale." No signature. I put it back in the envelope and slid it into the drawer next to the stove, the same drawer that held old matches and a tape measure. I didn't reply. That night I made tea again. This time I let it steep longer. The cup stained slightly on the inside. The mark didn't come off with scrubbing. The phone rang once, a number I didn't know. I let it ring. I placed it face down on the sill beside the worn leather gloves my father used when gardening. The right thumb was split. He used electrical tape to hold it together. I kept it that way. On the 7th day I found a note tucked behind the breaker box. Use the wood under the stairs before the winter. His handwriting uneven from the arthritis he refused to admit he had. It was the only thing in the cabin that addressed me directly. Not Cass, not sweetheart. Just use the wood. I lit the stove that evening even though it wasn't cold. The scent reminded me of the nights he stayed late, sketching strata lines in the back room, pencil smudges on his shirt sleeve, ash on his collar. Elaine once said at a dinner party, Cassidy always smelled like the outdoors. Dirt and smoke. Like Someone playing pretend. No one disagreed. Not even me. There had been a coat years ago that I loved, army green lined with quilted black nylon. I wore it even in spring. One day it disappeared from the rack. When I asked, Caleb shrugged. Maybe it didn't suit you anymore. I found it here in a bin under the stairs, stuffed next to a rain tarp and an unopened bottle of wood glue. The sleeve had a cigarette burn on the edge. I ran my fingers over the hole. I wore it that night, even indoors. The next morning I made toast on a skillet. The bread was slightly sull, but it browned evenly. I ate it standing. I opened the notebook again. This time, no names. Just a sentence I was not misplaced. I was removed. I didn't write anything after that. The wind moved a small stack of papers I left on the table. A receipt from a hardware store. A flyer for cabin repairs. The top one had a hand-drawn map of the coastline with notes in the margins. My father's sketches. I pressed them flat and placed a stone atop them. No one came. No one wrote again. The kettle still worked. That was enough. I no longer expect the sound of footsteps. The gravel stays still beneath the porch. The hinges don't creak. The silence is not waiting for anyone. The phone lit up on the windowsill at noon. Caleb's name. The message, short punctuated, impersonal. Mom asked how you've been. I told her you haven't reached out. I didn't type anything back. I folded the phone in my palm and set it face down next to the lavender I'd just trimmed. The stems were still wet. The scent clung faintly to my wrists. The old tin mailbox had started to rust through along the seams. I left it unrepaired. Mail still came. Flyers. Catalogues. And that week an envelope with the familiar crest of Decker and Hale, printed in the corner, unembossed this time, cheaper paper stock. Inside a drafted proposal for out-of-court settlement. Words like amicable, reputation, sensitive limited disclosure agreement lined the page like measured steps on stone. The reason was printed in bold near the bottom. Plaintiff wishes to minimize adverse media exposure to Whitmore Holdings. Not for me, not for fairness, just containment. I set the pages down and weighed them with a ceramic mug I hadn't yet washed. The rim still carried the outline of yesterday's tea, a small dark stain where the cup met the wood. The lavender had started to dry unevenly. One stem curled brittle at the base. I pressed it between 2 pages of a notebook I no longer wrote in. A postcard came 3 days later. Palm Springs. Image, a smiling family at a patio table, lemon slices floating in tall glasses. On the back, her handwriting still neat, slightly slanted. I miss the old afternoons by the sea. Hope you're well. No mention of the cabin, no reference to court, no apology. I turned the card over once, then again. I slid it behind the spice rack. That evening the porch light buzzed once, then stilled. The bulb had never worked well. I didn't replace it. A week passed. A name I didn't expect flashed across my inbox, Grant Whitmore. No greeting. Just a forwarded post, already public. A LinkedIn update complete with professional headshot tie, perfectly aligned the caption set in soft grey. Family is the foundation even when differences can't be resolved. I didn't click the link. I didn't scroll the comments. Instead, I opened the drawer with the old utility bills and slid the screen-printed image in between outdated insurance forms and a receipt for chimney cleaning from 98. A neighbor, someone I didn't know by name, waved that afternoon. I nodded once and returned to sanding at the edge of the stair rail. The wood still held faint impressions of my father's hands' calloused dents where he used to rest between repairs. The wind shifted around 3 p.m. It brought with it the faint sound of voices from across the hill. Laughter. The sharp clang of silverware against ceramic. For a moment I thought of the kitchen back home, how the refrigerator door always stuck unless you lifted slightly while pulling. How my seat was always nearest the door in case someone needed to step out for calls. Or in case I did. Once years ago, Grant had turned to me over turkey and cornbread and said, "You always slip away before dessert. It's your specialty." No one laughed. No one corrected. That line stayed with me longer than most invitations. I boiled water that evening and poured it into a chipped enamel mug. The rim was rough in one spot. I drank from the opposite side. On the edge of the table sat the rolled blueprint of the cabin one my father sketched decades ago, his handwriting still clear in the margins. Reinforce beams before spring, west, facing wall absorbs heat. Don't plant anything too close to the foundation. He'd written those notes before I was born. But they read like reminders for now. There was a voicemail on the phone later that night. No name, just a number with a San Francisco area code. A clipped message. Following up on our proposal, we assume silence is consent to engage third-party review. You are entitled to retain private counsel. I deleted it without playing it again. A crow landed on the porch rail the next morning. It looked at me briefly, then flew off, leaving behind a single dark feather. I picked it up and placed it inside the old cigar box where I kept folded letters from my deployment medals I hadn't displayed, and the key to a lock that no longer existed. They had returned in some way, in phrases, in images, in cautious offers disguised as kindness. But none of it carried the weight of recognition. Not the kind that restores, only the kind that erases gently, with just enough plausible warmth to call it peace. The scarf on the hook still hung where it had been. I hadn't touched it since the day I arrived. Some things shouldn't be moved, not because they matter to anyone else, but because they no longer need to be explained. I stopped folding napkins into neat triangles. One corner always curled, and I no longer felt the need to make it behave. The boards above the porch had begun to rot soft to the touch, flaking when pressed. I replaced them slowly, one by one, never all in a day. I wore the same canvas gloves my father once kept in the shed, now faded along the seams and split at the thumb. I didn't fix the tear. It let my skin meet the wood. I wrote with a fountain pen, blue ink, the kind that smudged, if I wasn't careful. I didn't mind the smudges. My notes weren't for display. One entry read, "Clouds passed without rain. No sharp pain in the shoulder. Tea too light, steeped again." No one else read the pages. I never tried to make them meaningful. Most mornings began with dry toast and over-boiled eggs. Some evenings a tomato sliced too thin spread across bread with salt and olive oil. I didn't call it dinner. I didn't light candles. I just ate. The library in town posted a notice asking for tutors. I checked the box next to history, left my phone number in block letters, and didn't expect a reply. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of 5 teenagers in a church basement that smelled faintly of furniture polish and old books. They called me Miss Rhodes. I let them. None of them knew I could field-strip a rifle in the dark, or that my knee still clicked when the weather turned. They didn't ask. They only wanted to know what caused the Dust Bowl and why it mattered. I explained quietly, drawing timelines on a smudged whiteboard. One girl stayed behind after class to say, "You explain things in a way that makes me care." I nodded once and erased the board. I never brought up the military. They never asked. I made enough to cover groceries, fuel, and the odd indulgence real butter, fresh blueberries when they were out of season. I had what I needed. A kettle that whistled too soon, a single armchair with frayed upholstery, a blanket stitched from old shirts' corners uneven. Caleb's name appeared on my phone late one Thursday. A voicemail under 2 minutes. I played it once, then again. His voice started clear, but caught midway like he wasn't used to pausing. He used my name once. Just, Cass, no explanations, no request for reply. I didn't delete it. I didn't save it, either. The next morning, I returned to my journal and wrote, "Some apologies don't arrive to be accepted, only to be said." I closed the cover gently as if the sentence might shift if jostled. The wind was sharp that day, dragging pine needles across the porch. I swept without urgency. A neighbor passed by, walking her dog. She lifted a hand. I mirrored the gesture. At the grocery store, a boy behind the register scanned my items and asked if I was new to the area. I told him no. He looked confused. I paid in cash and left the change in the tray. I didn't explain where I came from. That's not what they were really asking. The mailbox creaked less after I oiled the hinge. I didn't expect anything important inside. Most letters were addressed to someone who used to live here. I stacked them near the door and left a note, forwarded as received. No return requested. No one ever came to collect them. The old wool coat I found in the attic fit well enough. A button was missing, and the lining was torn near the left pocket. I stitched it with black thread, though the fabric was grey. The repair showed. I didn't mind. One of the boys in my tutoring group drew me a picture, his version of Mount Rushmore, with dogs instead of presidents. He handed it to me with a shrug, then ran to catch his ride. I pinned it to the inside of my kitchen cupboard, where no one else would see. The silence at night no longer pressed against me. It folded around the cabin like a quilt, stitched with distant waves and creaking wood. I read until my eyes blurred. I didn't wait for messages. I didn't expect voices. Grant posted a new article online, something about resilience in business. His words were polished, measured. There was a photo attached. Family-run foundation gala. Elaine in the center. Caleb beside her. No gaps in the lineup. No reason to suspect someone was ever missing. I didn't print it. I didn't close the tab either. I let the screen fade to black. When I walked into town, I wore my hair tied back with an elastic I'd kept from a base in Kandahar. No one recognized it. That was the point. Someone once told me healing means returning to who you were before. I no longer believe that. I didn't go back. I didn't forget. I didn't forgive. I just began. I used to think closure needed to be witnessed, that without someone on the other side to acknowledge it, an ending didn't count. The envelope had been sealed the night before, not with tape, but with a quiet sort of certainty. I didn't draft a cover letter. I didn't type an explanation. The pages inside were signed with my full name, Cassidy Rhodes. No middle name, no old surname, just the one I chose to keep. At the notary's office, the pen skipped slightly over the line. The paper shifted, caught a breeze from the oscillating fan in the corner, then settled. The woman behind the desk glanced at the contents but didn't read. She stamped, clicked, slid the envelope back to me without a word. Would you like a copy? No. Do you want them to acknowledge receipt? They won't need to. She blinked, nodded once, and returned to her keyboard. I slipped the envelope into the canvas pouch I brought from home, the same one I used to carry field notes, still faintly smelled like dust and oil. I walked out into the fog without checking my phone. The car ride back took longer than usual. I didn't rush. I didn't take the coastal highway for the view. I just followed the road that felt like mine. At one point, I stopped beside the bluff where my father once taught me how to find north without a compass. "Watch the shadow," he said. "It never lies." I hadn't thought about that in years. In the glove box was the silver ring he gave me the night before deployment. Not his wedding band, the other one. The one with the thin line etched along the inside, barely visible, but always there. I took it out turned it in my palm. It didn't shine anymore. It was too smooth to reflect anything now. I didn't throw it. I didn't press it to my lips or whisper into the wind. I simply placed it on the stone ledge where the sun first touched in the morning, left it sitting there, open to weather. On the way back to the house, I passed a billboard I hadn't noticed before. It featured a smiling man in a navy suit, arms folded slogan beneath "Legacy is built on truth." For a brief second, I wondered if Grant paid for it. Then I let the thought fall away. At home, I boiled water for tea, not out of habit, but because the kettle felt right in my hand. I didn't sweeten it. I didn't sip it slowly. I poured, drank, and let the heat settle in my chest like a steady hand. A letter arrived that afternoon, postmarked from a firm in San Francisco. Thick stock, crisp corners, embossed lettering. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I tucked it in the drawer beside the wooden spoon with the cracked handle and the old utility bill I never filed. That drawer had become a kind of museum for things I no longer needed to respond to. Later, I walked down to the edge of the garden where the lavender had started to brown. I didn't prune it. I let it fade. The bees had stopped coming weeks ago, but the stems still stood tall, brittle, stubborn. I respected that. The porch light flickered once. I didn't fix it. There had been a time I would have kept the ring. Held it in a box, told myself I wasn't finished with what it meant. But that morning, placing it on the rock, I didn't feel the urge to look back and check if it rolled or if the wind took it. I didn't leave a note nearby in case someone found it and wanted to return it. It wasn't lost. Nothing had been taken from me that I hadn't already released. Caleb hadn't written again. Neither had Elaine, but I noticed she'd stopped posting old family photos on social media, as if something or someone had reminded her not everyone liked to be cropped out. I received an automated notification from a storage facility in Carmel. The unit under my name was set to expire in 30 days. I let it lapse. That evening, I wiped the dining table with the sleeve of my sweatshirt, the same sleeve with a faint burn mark from the time I left a candle too close. I'd meant to replace the cover. I never did. I didn't wait for the phone to ring. It wouldn't. And if it did, the sound wouldn't mean anything more than a timer or a door swinging open to a place I no longer walked toward. Some goodbyes don't echo. They just settle. That night, I placed the pen I used to sign the papers back into the drawer. It didn't click. It didn't snap shut. It simply rested. And that was enough. I no longer wake up expecting anything to be different. Not quieter, not louder. Just still. The kind of stillness that isn't empty, but undemanding. The light filtered through the curtain, soft and undecided. I stayed lying down, counting the steady rhythm of the ceiling fan. The blanket had slipped halfway and I didn't fix it. The air was neither warm nor cold. It simply was. The kettle in the kitchen clicked when I turned it on. The same dented one I once wrapped in an old towel during winter storms. It hummed like it always does, low and persistent. I didn't rush it. I waited for the steam, watching it rise in loose curls. My mug had a chip along the rim shaped like a crescent. I turned it away from my mouth and poured the tea, black unflavored, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. There's a page still open in the notebook I've used for months. The paper has started to yellow slightly at the edges. I'd written, "Not everything lost needs recovering." The ink had smeared slightly where my hand brushed over it. I hadn't noticed until the next day. I left it that way. I don't check my phone before noon anymore. I stopped enabling notifications. There are still emails from the law firm, final acknowledgements, updates on asset transfers, silence dressed as legality. I scan the subject lines, then archive them all. Nothing requires my response. The battle ended the moment I stepped back. Elaine sent a letter last week. Not handwritten. A folded printout on thick, expensive paper, the kind used for graduation announcements or corporate newsletters. The family regrets that things have become so complex. We hope time brings clarity and healing. No signature, no return address. I placed it between pages of a book I had no intention of finishing. The lavender by the porch had started to bloom again. I watered it with the same aluminum can that leaks slightly at the handle. It stained my palm with rust. I didn't wash it off right away. I sat on the steps until the sun touched the railing. A car passed on the gravel road. No one stopped. Caleb tried calling last month. 3 rings, then voicemail. No message, just the number. Familiar but distant, like a radio station from another town that only comes through in bad weather. The journal I keep now is smaller, pocket-sized. No dates, no headings. Just fragments. June 12th. Wind too loud for sleep. No milk. Forgot again. Didn't mind. Dreamt of the hallway at the Rammstein base. Not the war. Just the hallway. These are not memories. They're leftovers. And I keep them not to remember, but to stop forgetting. There's a photo frame on the bookshelf. The original photo was replaced by a pressed fern leaf. I found it on the trail behind the cabin one morning. It had the kind of symmetry you don't plan for. The kind nature makes without an audience. Margaret once called to ask if I'd consider attending a charity event in Monterey. They'd love to honor your service. Just a short appearance. Maybe a speech. I waited for her to finish. Then I hung up. No callback. No explanation. Just the clarity of knowing when something's not mine to carry anymore. There's a jacket in the hallway closet, olive green, frayed at the cuffs. I haven't worn it since Germany. I keep it because it reminds me that I used to move, quickly speak, sharply act, without hesitation. Now, I close cabinet doors gently. I let the spoon rest inside the cup without a sound. The neighbors sometimes wave when they pass by. An old man with 2 dogs. A woman who grows tomatoes in mismatched pots. None of them know who I used to be. That is the gift. The last time I visited the town centre, I saw a Welcome Home Sergeant Daniels banner stretched across the cafe window. Someone clapped as he walked in. I didn't stay. I bought bread, nodded politely, and left. There was no reason to linger in someone else's reunion. I fixed the screen door hinge yesterday. 3 screws and a quiet satisfaction. No applause. Just a door that no longer squeaks. A student from the tutoring group mailed me a thank you card. On the front, it read, "History isn't just about facts, it's about remembering." Inside you made me see the past without fear. I pinned it to the inside of a kitchen cabinet next to a grocery list I never finished. Sometimes the ocean is louder than I expect. It rushes in like a secret trying to be kept too long. I listen until it softens. It always softens. Elaine's voice echoes less now. You don't understand what sacrifice really means. I used to try to prove her wrong. Then I realized some sentences are designed not to be challenged, but to erase. I reread the statement I filed with the notary one last time before sealing it. Not to relive it, just to witness it. I, Cassidy Rhodes, relinquish all legal and personal affiliation with Whitmore Holdings. There was no anger in the words, only precision. I folded it once scented the crease and left it on the desk. The silver ring from my father is no longer in my drawer. I left it where the light touches the stone ledge by the cliff, not buried, not thrown, just placed. If someone finds it, they'll decide what it means. That's enough. I don't miss the version of me who waited for approval. She worked hard, saluted properly, stood tall and asked nothing. I know why she existed. I also know why she's no longer here. There's a line in a book I underlined once: to survive is not to be spared, but to be seen. I read it again recently. The ink has faded. The meaning hasn't. Today I opened the window halfway. The breeze moved the curtain like breath. I didn't stop it. I poured my tea slower than usual. The first sip was too hot. I waited for it to cool. I didn't need to rush. The radio played a song I hadn't heard in years. I didn't turn it up. I let it blend into the sound of the wind through the pine trees. It ended without a name. I didn't need one. I stood by the sink, holding the cup with both hands, watching the light shift on the floor. No meetings, no claims, no need to repeat what's already been released. I haven't written the end of the notebook yet. There's no need to. A life doesn't end with a conclusion. It becomes itself over and over in quieter ways. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be noticed. I was simply living, and that was enough.